My name is Drew. And at 34 years old, I built a tech empire worth $45 million from absolutely nothing. I came from a middle-class family where college degrees meant everything. Despite my success, last Thanksgiving, my own father looked me in the eyes and screamed, "Get out, you lowlife." They never knew I was paying their bills, while they called me uneducated trash. The funny thing about success? Sometimes the people who should be proudest are the last to see your value. Before I tell you how I went from family hero to lowlife overnight, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe if you've ever felt underestimated by the people who should believe in you most. Growing up in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago, my childhood looked normal from the outside. Our two-story house with the fading blue paint stood in a row of similar homes, all filled with families chasing the American dream. My father, Robert, worked as an accountant at a mid-sized firm, while my mother, Nancy, taught third grade at the local elementary school. They were hard-working people with traditional values that centered around one core belief: education was the only path to success. This belief shaped every aspect of our family dynamic, especially when it came to my older sister Melissa and me. Melissa was the golden child, the one who checked every box on my parents' list of expectations. She brought home straight A's from kindergarten through high school, participated in every academic club, and won scholarships that made my parents beam with pride at neighborhood barbecues. By the time I was in middle school, Melissa was already accepted to Northwestern University on her way to medical school. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of my teenage years. Where Melissa thrived in structured learning environments, I struggled. It wasn't that I couldn't learn. I just learned differently. My mind worked in patterns, connections, and possibilities, rather than memorization and standardized tests. While Melissa could recite historical dates and mathematical formulas, I could take apart and reassemble a computer by age 12 without anyone showing me how. "Drew, please focus on what matters," my mother would say whenever she caught me working on some new gadget, instead of studying for an upcoming test. "These little projects won't get you into college." The comparison was constant and came from all directions. During parent-teacher conferences, my parents would sit stiffly as my teachers explained that while I showed remarkable creativity and problem-solving skills, my grades remained average at best. At family gatherings, relatives would first ask about Melissa's latest academic achievement before turning to me with lower expectations. "And how about you, Drew? Passing everything this semester?" Despite the academic pressure, I found my own path early on. At 14, I started my first unofficial business mowing lawns in our neighborhood. By 16, I expanded to computer repair, helping neighbors recover lost files and remove viruses from their machines. I charged $30 per job, which seemed like a fortune to me at the time. My parents viewed these endeavors as cute distractions at best, harmful diversions from my studies at worst. "Entrepreneurs are just people who couldn't succeed the traditional way," my father said once during dinner, when I excitedly told them about fixing the computer network at a local insurance office. "Get your degree first, then you can play businessman." When high school graduation arrived, I walked across the stage with a 2.8 GPA, a figure that made my parents wince. Melissa had graduated as valedictorian with a perfect 4.06 years earlier. The contrast couldn't have been more stark, and it set the stage for the biggest conflict yet. My decision about college. "I'm not going," I announced over dinner one night. About a month after graduation, "I've been offered a full-time position at Tech Hub, and I'm going to take it." The silence that followed felt like a physical presence in the room. My mother put down her fork, her expression shifting from surprise to disappointment. My father's face flushed red. "Not an option," he said flatly. "We've already submitted applications to community colleges. You can transfer to a 4-year school after you get your grades up." "I don't want to waste time learning things I'll never use," I countered. "I'm learning more at my part-time job than I would in any classroom." That job is fine for pocket money, but it's not a career, my mother insisted, her voice taking on the same tone she used with her most challenging students. The argument lasted for weeks. Eventually, seeing I wouldn't budge, my parents tried a different approach. Fine, my father said one evening. Throw away your future, but don't come crying to us when you're 30 and stuck in some dead-end retail job while your sister is saving lives as a surgeon. That night, I made a promise to myself and to them. I'll prove you wrong. I'll make something of myself, and I'll make you proud. Just not in the way you expect. They didn't believe me, of course, but their doubt only fueled my determination. I took the full-time position at Tech Hub, a local electronics store that also offered repair services. The pay wasn't great, but the experience was invaluable. I was learning about business operations, customer service, and technical skills that would form the foundation of my future success. My parents viewed this first step with resigned disappointment. They stopped bringing up my future at dinner. They stopped comparing me to Melissa, which was actually a relief. Instead, they treated my job like a temporary phase I was going through before eventually coming to my senses. They had no idea this was just the beginning of my real education. By my 19th birthday, I had saved enough money to move out of my parents' house. It wasn't much, but with a roommate named Jake, who worked at a local bar, I could afford a small 2-bedroom apartment, about 20 minutes from Tech Hub. The place was nothing special, just a basic unit in a 3-story complex with thin walls and unreliable heating. But it was mine. The freedom to make my own decisions without judgment was worth every penny of the $800 in monthly rent. My parents viewed my move with a mixture of relief and concern. I think they were glad to no longer have daily reminders of my poor life choices. But they also worried I was cementing my fate as the family disappointment. My sister Melissa called me once a week out of what seemed like a sense of duty, our conversations always circling back to whether I had reconsidered my options. At Tech Hub, I threw myself into learning everything I could. Within 6 months, I was promoted to assistant manager, which came with a modest raise and more responsibilities. I learned inventory management, staff scheduling, and customer relationship building. The store owner, a gruff but fair man named Frank, seemed to recognize something in me that my family couldn't see. "You've got good instincts for this business," he told me, after I reorganized the store layout, which resulted in a 15% increase in accessory sales. "But you're wasting your talent in retail. You should be building something of your own." His words struck a chord. With my newfound confidence, I started my side hustle building websites for local businesses. My first client was the owner of a pizza place 2 doors down from Tech Hub, who complained about losing business to chains with online ordering systems. I built him a simple but effective website with an order form for $700, spending nights and weekends perfecting it. When the pizza shop's sales increased by 20% in the first month, word spread. Soon I had a waiting list of small business owners wanting similar services. I was working during the day at Tech Hub and coding through the night for my growing client list. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford. The path wasn't smooth by any means. 3 months in, I lost a major client when their new website crashed during a promotional event. Another client refused to pay after claiming the design wasn't what they envisioned, despite approving every step. Some nights, I found myself questioning whether my parents had been right all along. During a rare Sunday dinner at my parents' house, I made the mistake of mentioning some of these challenges. "This is why people get degrees in computer science," my father said, not looking up from his pot roast. "They learn how to do things properly, not by trial and error with other people's businesses." "Robert," my mother interjected, "at least he's trying something." But even her defense carried the undercurrent that my efforts were cute, but ultimately misguided. I stopped sharing my business ventures with them after that. Instead, I doubled down on improving my skills, taking online courses in web development and digital marketing whenever I could afford them. I built a portfolio of successful projects and learned from each failure, determined to prove my path was valid. The turning point came when I was 22. I was still working at Tech Hub, though now as a full manager, while running my website business on the side. One afternoon, a customer named Richard came in looking for a specialized computer setup for his investment firm. During our conversation, he mentioned his frustration with his company's outdated website and inefficient internal systems. I could help with that, I said without hesitation, then showed him my portfolio on my laptop. Richard was impressed enough to invite me to his office for a formal presentation. I spent 3 sleepless nights preparing, knowing this could be my big break. The presentation went well, but what came next changed everything. "I like your vision," Richard said after I finished my pitch. "But more importantly, I like your hunger. How would you feel about $10,000 to get started on something bigger than websites?" I almost fell out of my chair. Richard wasn't just offering me a contract. He was offering to become an angel investor in my first serious business venture. He saw potential in my ideas for streamlining business operations through custom software solutions. With his investment, I could finally quit Tech Hub and focus exclusively on building my company. That night, I called my parents, eager to share my news. Their response was predictably cautious. "Just be careful," my mother warned. "This sounds too good to be true. Make sure everything is in writing," my father added, "and don't quit your day job until you see the money." Their lack of enthusiasm stung, but it no longer had the power to derail me. Richard's belief in me was the validation I needed. With his investment, I registered my company, Black Box Solutions, and rented a tiny office space above a coffee shop. I hired a part-time developer to help with the workload, and we began building our first major project. A customer relationship management system tailored specifically for financial advisors like Richard. The first year was grueling. There were nights I slept on the office floor, weeks when I questioned my sanity, and moments when failure seemed inevitable. But slowly, steadily, the business grew. Richard's firm became our success story, with their efficiency increasing measurably after implementing our system. They referred us to other financial firms, and our client base expanded. By the end of our second year, Black Box Solutions was generating consistent revenue. We had landed several 5-figure contracts and expanded to a team of 4. I was paying myself a modest salary, enough to move into a better apartment and occasionally enjoy a meal that didn't come from a microwave. It wasn't millions, but it was sustainable, and it was mine. When Richard introduced me to a potential client who signed our first 6-figure contract, I knew we had crossed an important threshold. We weren't just surviving. We were becoming a serious contender in the business software space. At 24, I had built something real and valuable through determination and strategic risk-taking. Not through the traditional path my parents had insisted was the only way. The technology landscape was shifting rapidly in my mid-20s, and I saw an opportunity that many established companies were missing. Mobile apps were becoming essential, not optional, for businesses wanting to stay competitive. While most development shops were charging premium rates for basic applications, I restructured Black Box Solutions to offer comprehensive digital solutions that included web platforms, mobile apps, and internal management systems, all talking to each other seamlessly. Our timing couldn't have been better. We caught the wave just as it was building, positioning ourselves as specialists in integrated digital ecosystems rather than standalone products. This approach attracted clients who were tired of working with multiple vendors who couldn't coordinate effectively. With our reputation growing, I moved the company from our cramped space above the coffee shop to a proper office in a commercial building downtown. The monthly rent increased from $800 to $3,500, a leap that kept me awake at night, but one that gave us the professional image we needed to attract larger clients. My first major hiring phase brought its own challenges. Finding talented developers was difficult enough, but finding people who shared my vision for integrated solutions proved even harder. I interviewed dozens of candidates before finding the right team members, often passing on technically brilliant programmers who couldn't grasp the holistic approach we were taking. Culture eats strategy for breakfast became my mantra during this period, a quote I had read in a business book and taken to heart. I wanted people who were not just skilled, but adaptable, not just smart, but collaborative. By the time we reached 15 employees, I realized I was building more than a business. I was creating a community of innovation. The growing pains were real and constant. There were payment delays from clients that left us scrambling to make payroll. There were projects that ran significantly over budget because we underestimated their complexity. There were personality conflicts among team members that threatened to derail our collaborative culture. Each challenge required me to develop new skills, from financial management to conflict resolution. What kept me going through these difficult periods was seeing the tangible impact of our work. One of our clients, a local grocery chain, increased their customer retention by 40% after implementing our loyalty app. Another client, a healthcare provider, reduced their administrative costs by nearly 30% using our scheduling system. We weren't just building software. We were solving real problems for real businesses. By my 25th birthday, Blackbox Solutions crossed the $1 million annual revenue threshold. I remember sitting alone in my office after everyone had gone home, looking at the financial reports in disbelief. We had done it. We had built $1 million company without venture capital, without fancy degrees, without following the conventional playbook. I called my parents that night, hoping that this milestone would finally earn their approval. My mother sounded happy for me, though still somewhat confused about what exactly my company did. My father's response was more measured. "That's good, son," he said. "But remember, businesses come and go. A medical degree is forever." It was a telling comparison. In their world, my sister's steady progression through medical school and into her residency represented real achievement, while my business success seemed ephemeral and risky. I decided then to stop seeking their validation and instead focus on the next phase of growth. That next phase involved reinvesting nearly every dollar of profit back into the company. While some of my employees questioned why we weren't celebrating our success with bonuses and perks, I kept our focus on the future. We expanded our technical capabilities, invested in training programs, and began developing proprietary frameworks that would allow us to build solutions faster and more efficiently. The strategy paid off. By year 7, we had grown to 50 employees and moved into an entire floor of a prestigious office building with views of the city skyline. Our client list included several Fortune 500 companies alongside the small and mid-sized businesses that had been our bread and butter. Our annual revenue had climbed to $7 million, with healthy profit margins that allowed us to be selective about which projects we took on. As we approached 100 employees, I faced perhaps the biggest challenge yet: letting go. I could no longer be involved in every decision, review every line of code, or meet with every client. I had to build a leadership team I could trust and develop systems that would maintain our quality and culture without my direct oversight. This transition from founder to CEO tested me in ways that technical challenges never had. I made mistakes in hiring for my executive team, bringing on a chief financial officer who looked great on paper, but created a toxic environment that nearly drove away several key team members. Learning to fire quickly and hire slowly became another painful but necessary lesson. The real breakthrough came in our 9th year, when we launched our proprietary software platform, Nexus. Unlike our custom solutions, Nexus was a product we owned completely, a comprehensive business management system that could be configured for different industries without building from scratch each time. The development cost was enormous, nearly a full year of our profits, but the potential was even greater. Nexus transformed our business model. Instead of relying solely on project-based revenue, we now had recurring subscription income from clients using our platform. This stability allowed us to plan and invest with greater confidence, accelerating our growth even further. By year 10, with over 250 employees across 3 offices, Blackbox Solutions had become a recognized leader in business technology solutions. We were featured in industry publications, invited to speak at conferences, and courted by larger tech companies interested in acquisition. The first buyout offer came when I was 31. $20 million from a Silicon Valley firm looking to expand their enterprise services division. It was a life-changing amount of money, enough to never work again if I chose. But it didn't feel right. We were just hitting our stride, just beginning to realize the vision I had been building toward for over a decade. I declined the offer, and 6 months later, received another for $30 million. Again, I said no, much to the frustration of some of my early employees who owned small equity stakes. 3 months after that, a third offer came in at $45 million, along with the promise that I could stay on as CEO, with significant autonomy. This time, I seriously considered it. The valuation reflected the true worth we had built, and the terms would allow me to continue leading the company while providing financial security for everyone who had taken a chance on Blackbox Solutions. After weeks of negotiations and soul-searching, I made my decision. We would remain independent. The $45 million valuation became our benchmark, though, validating everything we had built from that first $10,000 investment. Blackbox Solutions was now a major player, and I, the college dropout whose parents had predicted failure, had built it all from scratch by the age of 32. Despite the growing distance between my parents and me regarding my career choices, I never completely severed our relationship. We still gathered for major holidays, exchanged birthday calls, and maintained the basic framework of family. Even if our conversations rarely went deeper than surface pleasantries, I chose not to share details about my business success, partly from lingering resentment over their lack of support, but mostly because I wanted to be valued for who I was, not what I had achieved. The dynamic shifted dramatically when my father called me one Tuesday evening. His voice, usually confident and authoritative, sounded strained and unfamiliar. "I've been let go," he said without preamble. "Budget cuts." After 26 years with the firm, at 58, my father was facing unemployment in an industry increasingly favoring younger accountants with advanced technical skills. His severance package would cover expenses for about 6 months. But after that, their financial situation would become precarious. My mother's teaching salary alone wouldn't cover their mortgage, car payments, and the various debts they had accumulated. "We'll figure it out," my father said, his pride evident even in this moment of vulnerability. "I just wanted you to know in case we need to skip some family gatherings while we tighten our belts." That night, I reviewed my personal finances, separate from the company accounts. I had been paying myself a reasonable but not extravagant salary, living well below my means while reinvesting in the business. As a result, I had accumulated significant personal savings that had nothing to do with the company's valuation. I made a decision then that would alter our family dynamic forever. I would help my parents financially, but quietly, without making them feel like charity cases. The next week, I visited their home for the first time in months, armed with a proposal disguised as a request. "I need a favor," I said over coffee at their kitchen table. "I've been looking at some investment opportunities, and I need someone with accounting experience to help me evaluate them. Dad, would you consider consulting for me? It would be part-time, mostly remote work, but I'd pay standard consulting rates." The consulting role was largely fictional, though I did send him some actual financial documents to review. The real purpose was to provide him with income while preserving his dignity. The arrangement worked better than I expected. My father took the role seriously, providing thoughtful analysis and even some valuable insights. The monthly payments, generous but not suspiciously so, helped them stay afloat, while he looked for more permanent employment. Around the same time, my sister Melissa was facing her own crisis. The golden child's path had not been as smooth as it appeared from the outside. Though she had completed medical school and her residency, becoming a full-fledged surgeon, the achievement had come at a significant cost. The punishing hours, emotional toll of losing patients, and political navigation of hospital hierarchies had left her burned out and questioning her choices. During a rare sibling dinner without our parents, she confessed her unhappiness. "I don't think I can do this for another 30 years, she admitted, looking more vulnerable than I had ever seen her. "But I have $300,000 in student loans. I'm trapped." Here was my perfect, accomplished sister, the one held up as the model I should follow, confiding that her supposedly ideal path had led to a gilded cage. Without revealing the full extent of my financial situation, I offered support. "What would you do if money wasn't an issue?" I asked. "Teach," she answered without hesitation. "Medical education. Working with students. Not 70-hour weeks in surgery." Over the following months, I found ways to help Melissa transition to a teaching position at a medical school, which paid significantly less than her surgical role, but aligned better with her values and well-being. Through a series of investments and loans that we both understood would never be repaid, I helped ease her financial burden enough to make the career change possible. My parents' financial situation continued to deteriorate despite my father's consulting income. At one point, I discovered they were 3 months behind on their mortgage payments, risking foreclosure. Without revealing my involvement, I created a mortgage assistance program through a financial services company that was actually one of our business clients. The program selected my parents for assistance, effectively paying off their remaining mortgage balance, while making it appear they had qualified for a special refinancing option due to my father's years of excellent payment history. I employed similar methods to replace their aging car when it finally broke down beyond repair, arranging for them to win a new vehicle through a promotional contest they didn't remember entering. Each intervention required elaborate planning to maintain the illusion that these were lucky breaks rather than direct assistance from their supposedly struggling son. Through these various channels, I provided nearly $400,000 in support to my family over 2 years, all while maintaining the pretense that I was doing okay with my little tech company. The cognitive dissonance in our relationship grew increasingly strange. My parents would accept this mysterious good fortune while still making comments about my lack of formal education. "If only you had finished college," my mother would say while driving the car I had secretly provided. "You could have a stable position like your cousin David at that insurance company." Their perception began to shift, though. As my more modest achievements became visible, I was featured in a local business publication as an entrepreneur to watch, which my parents proudly shared with their friends. I purchased a small but stylish condo in a good neighborhood, which impressed them during their first visit. Gradually, they began referring to me as my son, the businessman, in conversations with extended family, a designation that, while not carrying the prestige of my daughter, the doctor, at least acknowledged some level of legitimacy in my chosen path. What they didn't know was that alongside these visible signs of moderate success, I had purchased a stunning beach house in Florida. The 5-bedroom property, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Gulf of Mexico, was my personal retreat, a place where I could escape the pressures of running a growing company. I told no one in my family about this purchase, keeping it as a private symbol of what I had accomplished. As my parents' financial situation stabilized and my sister settled into her new teaching role, I began hosting holiday gatherings at my condo, taking over the tradition from my mother. These events became opportunities for tentative reconciliation, moments where the old wounds seemed less raw and our family bonds reasserted themselves. During one Thanksgiving dinner, my father raised a toast that suggested a genuine shift in his perspective. "To Drew," he said, glass held high, "who proved that there's more than one path to success. We may not have always understood your choices, son, but we're proud of the man you've become." The words I had waited years to hear finally came, and they felt good, even if they were based on a fraction of the truth. I believed, perhaps naively, that our family had turned a corner. The approval I had sought for so long seemed within reach, built on a foundation of half-truths and hidden generosity. I allowed myself to hope that when the full extent of my success eventually came to light, it would only strengthen the newfound respect they had begun to show me. What I didn't realize was how fragile this reconciliation truly was, and how quickly it would shatter when the deeper truth emerged. The first sign that something was wrong came from an unexpected source. My sister's husband, James. He contacted me privately, concerned about some financial irregularities he had noticed while helping my parents organize their tax documents. "I don't want to cause problems," he said hesitantly during our phone call, "but I think your dad might be gambling. There are regular large withdrawals from their accounts, always in cash, always right after deposits." This revelation hit me like a physical blow. I had been providing substantial financial support to my parents for nearly 2 years, believing I was helping them rebuild their security. The thought that my father might be gambling away that support was difficult to process. Even more troubling was the realization that my mother must know about it. I hired a private investigator, feeling guilty about the invasion of privacy, but needing to understand the scope of the problem. The report confirmed my worst fears. My father was indeed gambling regularly at a casino about an hour from their home. What had likely started as a way to cope with the stress of unemployment had developed into a serious habit, consuming a significant portion of their income, including the funds I was providing through various channels. Before confronting my parents, I spoke with Melissa, wondering if she had any insights into the situation. Her response was unexpected. "I'm not surprised," she said, her voice carrying a weariness I hadn't noticed before. "Dad's always had this problem, but Mom kept it under control. It probably got worse when he lost his job." "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, feeling betrayed that this significant family issue had been kept from me. "Honestly, because they've never taken you seriously, Drew. Even now, with your business doing well, they talk about you like you're still playing entrepreneur. Mom called your company a hobby business just last month." The conversation with Melissa revealed a pattern of dismissal I hadn't fully recognized. Despite accepting my help, despite the outward signs of reconciliation, my parents continued to view my achievements as somehow less legitimate than traditional success. They took my money while diminishing its source. Armed with this knowledge, I decided to address both issues at once: my father's gambling and the underlying disrespect that had characterized our relationship for years. I scheduled a family dinner at my condo, inviting my parents, Melissa, and James. I prepared carefully, gathering financial records that documented both my support and my father's withdrawals. The evening started pleasantly enough, with conversation flowing around safe topics like Melissa's teaching position and an upcoming family wedding. When dinner was finished and we moved to the living room with coffee, I carefully introduced the real purpose of the gathering. "Dad, Mom, we need to talk about something important," I began, keeping my voice level. "I know about the gambling, Dad, and I know it's been going on for months." The room went silent. My father's face flushed red, while my mother suddenly became intensely interested in her coffee cup. "That's none of your business," my father finally responded, his voice tight. "It became my business when you started gambling away money I provided," I countered, then proceeded to outline every form of financial support I had given them over the past 2 years. The consulting fees, the mortgage payoff disguised as a refinancing program, the car, the timely gifts that always seemed to arrive when bills were due. My mother's expression shifted from embarrassment to shock as the full extent of my involvement became clear. My father's reaction was different, a volatile mixture of shame and anger that quickly boiled over. "So, what if I enjoy playing cards?" he snapped. "At least I worked a real job for 30 years before I hit a rough patch. You think running some little website company makes you a financial expert? That little website company is how I've been able to help all of you," I responded, struggling to maintain my composure. Black Box Solutions employs over 250 people and generates millions in revenue. I've been supporting this family while you pretend I'm still the underachieving kid who skipped college. My mother finally spoke, her voice carrying that familiar tone of condescension that had marked so many of our conversations about my career. "Drew, we appreciate what you've done, but money from computer games and websites isn't really earned the same way as someone like your sister's salary." Melissa spent years studying and training. Her money comes from saving lives. My money comes from building a company that provides value to hundreds of businesses and employs hundreds of people, I countered. And Melissa's career change was funded by that same money you're dismissing. This revelation caused another ripple of tension. My parents turned to Melissa, who confirmed that I had helped her pay off a significant portion of her student loans to make her career transition possible. Rather than inspiring gratitude or reflection, these revelations seemed to trigger deeper resentment in my father. The conversation quickly spiraled as years of unaddressed issues surfaced. My father brought up childhood disappointments, teenage rebellions, and every perceived failure he could recall, as if building a case that I remained unworthy despite my success. The breaking point came when he mentioned a business investment I had attempted at 20, which had failed within months. "Remember that car detailing service you tried to start? Lost $5,000 in 3 months. That's who you are. You got lucky with this tech thing, but you're still the same undisciplined kid who couldn't focus long enough to finish college." Something in me snapped at that moment. I had endured decades of being measured against impossible standards, years of having my achievements minimized, months of secretly supporting the very people who continued to demean my choices. In a voice much calmer than I felt, I laid out the truth they had never bothered to learn. Black Box Solutions is valued at $45 million. I've turned down multiple acquisition offers because I believe in what we're building. I own a beach house in Florida worth more than this entire neighborhood. I've paid off your mortgage, funded Melissa's career change, and kept this family financially stable while receiving nothing but criticism in return. And I'm done. The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's face had gone pale. Melissa and James exchanged uncomfortable glances. My father, however, seemed to swell with indignation, as if my success was itself an insult to him. "You think I care about your imaginary millions?" he shouted, rising from his seat. "You sit there thinking you're better than everyone because you play with computers all day? At least your sister has a real education. At least she contributes something meaningful to society." "Dad, stop," Melissa interjected. But he was beyond reason now. "No wonder you never had a real relationship," he continued, unleashing words that seemed to have been waiting years to be spoken. "What woman would want some uneducated trash who got lucky with a website? You think your money makes you successful? You're still the same disappointment you've always been." My mother made a half-hearted attempt to calm him, which only redirected his anger. "And you?" He turned to her. "Always defending him. Always making excuses. Drew just learns differently. Drew just needs to find his path." Well, this is his path. Playing businessman and throwing his money around like it makes him important. The room had become unbearably tense. James looked ready to intervene physically, if necessary. Melissa was openly crying. Through it all, I remained seated, watching the final collapse of the illusion that had been our family reconciliation. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red as he delivered his final judgment, pointing toward the door with a shaking finger. "Get out, you lowlife. Get out of our lives if you think you're too good for this family." The demand was absurd, given that we were in my home, but the message was clear nonetheless. I was being excommunicated from the family I had supported because my success challenged their narrative. Everyone seemed to be waiting for me to explode in response, to match his anger with my own. Instead, I simply nodded and replied, "Okay, fine." My calm acceptance seemed to confuse everyone in the room. They had expected denial, defense, or counterattack. My father stood frozen, finger still pointing, as if uncertain what to do. When his provocation failed to land as expected, without another word, I stood, walked to the door, and opened it. "I think it's best if you all leave now," I said quietly. "We're done here." They filed out in stunned silence. My father still muttering under his breath. My mother attempting some form of apology that died on her lips when she met my gaze. Melissa hugged me briefly, whispering, "I'll call you tomorrow," before following our parents. James gave me a sympathetic nod as he closed the door behind them. Standing alone in my condo, surrounded by the evidence of my success and the remnants of our family dinner, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. The charade was over. The relationship I had been trying to repair was finally revealed as the hollow shell it had always been. The painful truth had emerged, and with it came the freedom to stop seeking approval from people who would never truly give it. That night, I checked into a hotel downtown rather than staying in my condo. I needed neutral space to process the emotional aftermath of the confrontation. Sitting on the edge of the king-sized bed, I found myself cycling through anger, hurt, vindication, and grief. The family I had known, however flawed, was effectively gone. The illusion of potential reconciliation had been shattered beyond repair. My phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from Melissa, expressing concern and distancing herself from our parents' behavior. I appreciated her support, but needed time alone to determine my next steps. This wasn't a situation that could be resolved with apologies or another attempt at understanding. The fundamental issue wasn't the gambling or even the harsh words, but the realization that my parents' conditional approval would always be tied to following their prescribed path, rather than my own success. By morning, I had made my decision: a complete strategic retreat from the situation. I wouldn't engage in further arguments or attempts at reconciliation. I wouldn't continue the cycle of proving myself to people who refused to see my value. Instead, I would focus entirely on my own well-being and the business I had built. I called my assistant from the hotel and instructed her to clear my calendar for the next week. Then, I booked a flight to Florida for that afternoon. If my beach house was a symbol of my success, it was time I actually enjoyed it, rather than keeping it as a secret testament to achievements my family refused to acknowledge. Before leaving, I made one final stop at my condo to pack a suitcase. On the kitchen counter, I found a handwritten note that had been slipped under my door. It was from my mother, a rambling combination of apology and justification that never quite took responsibility for the years of dismissal. The note ended with a request to call her to work things out as a family. I folded the note and placed it in my desk drawer without responding. The flight to Florida gave me time to reflect on the practical implications of my decision. I would need to formally end all financial support to my parents, which meant contacting several service providers and financial institutions. I made these calls from the plane, systematically dismantling the support structure I had built for them over the years. I wasn't acting out of vengeance, but from the clear understanding that continuing to support people who fundamentally disrespected me was unhealthy for everyone involved. When I arrived at my beach house in Naples, the contrast with my life in Chicago was striking. Here, the expansive windows framed a view of white sand and turquoise water. The open floor plan and minimalist design created a sense of peace that had been notably absent from my family interactions. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to fully inhabit this space without guilt or secrecy. The first 3 days in Florida, I did almost nothing. I slept late, walked on the beach, ordered delivery food, and ignored emails. This wasn't avoidance so much as necessary recovery, giving my mind and body time to process the emotional upheaval. By the 4th day, I was ready to re-engage with my life and business, though still from the sanctuary of my beach house. I set up a temporary office in the sunroom, with its panoramic view of the Gulf of Mexico. I held video conferences with my executive team, reviewed quarterly projections, and made decisions about upcoming projects. The physical distance provided a useful perspective, allowing me to focus on strategic questions rather than day-to-day operations. During the second week, I began exploring the local community, finding favorite restaurants and coffee shops, meeting neighbors, and considering the possibility of making this my primary residence rather than just a retreat. The anonymity was refreshing after years of navigating complex family dynamics. Here, I was simply Drew, the new guy from Chicago, not the son who had disappointed, not the brother who had succeeded differently, not the secret financial supporter of a family that couldn't acknowledge his achievements. 3 weeks into my self-imposed exile, the situation back in Chicago began to shift. My sister called to inform me that our parents were facing severe financial consequences from the sudden termination of my support. Their mortgage payments, which I had been quietly covering, were again overdue. The car I had provided needed repairs they couldn't afford. Credit card bills, inflated by my father's gambling, were going unpaid. "They're asking about you," Melissa said cautiously. "They want to know when you're coming back." "I'm not," I replied simply. "At least not to that situation. I'm considering making Florida my permanent home." Her silence conveyed her surprise. We had always lived in the same city. Our family concentrated in one geographic area despite our differences. The idea that I might permanently relocate challenged the assumption that our family conflicts would eventually resolve as they always had in the past. "Is this really about what Dad said?" she finally asked. "You know how he gets." "He didn't mean it. This isn't about one argument," I explained. "It's about 34 years of conditional acceptance. It's about building a $45 million company and still being seen as the family failure." "I'm not angry anymore, Melissa. I'm just done." After our conversation, I received an increasing number of messages from extended family members. Word had spread, though in a distorted form. Some believed I had suffered a breakdown and fled to Florida. Others thought I was holding a financial grudge over some minor slight. A few simply wanted to confirm the rumors about my company's valuation, suddenly interested in reconnecting with their successful relative. I responded politely but briefly to these messages, neither confirming nor denying details about my business. What surprised me most was how quickly news traveled through the family network once there was something interesting to discuss. The same aunts, uncles, and cousins who had shown little interest in my career for years were now actively seeking information about black box solutions. The culmination of this newfound interest came in an unexpected form. A cousin who worked at the Chicago Business Journal contacted me about featuring black box solutions in an upcoming issue, highlighting successful local companies. I agreed to the interview, answering questions honestly about the company's growth, valuation, and future plans. I didn't mention my family situation or recent relocation, focusing instead on the business achievements that had previously gone unacknowledged by those closest to me. The article was published 3 weeks after our family confrontation. Under the headline, "Chicago's Hidden Tech Giant," it detailed Black Box Solutions' journey from startup to industry leader, including the $45 million valuation, and my decision to remain independent despite lucrative acquisition offers. The piece included a professional photo of me in our Chicago office, taken months earlier, and quotes from clients praising our innovative approach to business technology. Within hours of publication, the article was circulating widely through business circles in Chicago and beyond. Our company website saw a surge in traffic, and my LinkedIn profile gained hundreds of new connections. Former classmates, including those who had once questioned my decision to skip college, sent congratulatory messages. The external validation was satisfying but ultimately less important than the internal confidence I had developed through building my company. The article eventually made its way to my parents, though not directly through me. According to Melissa, a neighbor had shown it to them, surprised they hadn't mentioned their son's remarkable success. The revelation of the full extent of my achievements, now publicly documented in a respected business publication, forced them to confront the reality they had been denying for years. The messages began arriving that evening. First from my mother, a lengthy text expressing shock and confused pride, asking why I had kept this a secret when I had tried to tell them numerous times. Then from my father, a shorter message simply requesting that I call him to discuss recent developments. Both messages notably lacked any acknowledgement of their previous dismissal or the confrontation that had led to our current estrangement. I didn't respond immediately. After years of seeking their approval and recognition, I now found their sudden interest, when faced with public evidence, less meaningful. Their reaction seemed driven more by social perception than genuine understanding or respect for what I had built. Over the next several days, their messages grew increasingly urgent. My mother called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that evolved from confusion to concern to something approaching panic as she realized the financial implications of our estrangement. My father, ever practical, eventually sent an email outlining their financial situation and explicitly asking if I would reconsider my position regarding family support. The directness of the request, devoid of apology or recognition of the underlying issues, confirmed that my decision to create distance had been necessary. They were approaching me not as a son whose achievements they valued, but as a financial resource they had lost access to. The $45 million valuation had changed how they viewed me, but not in the way I had once hoped. Instead of finally seeing my path as valid, they simply saw it as lucrative. As the fourth week of my Florida residence began, I had established a new rhythm to my life. I worked remotely most days, flew to Chicago for essential meetings, and spent weekends exploring my new community. I joined a local business association, began looking at commercial real estate for a potential Florida office of Black Box Solutions, and even started dating someone I met at a community fundraiser. The distance, both physical and emotional, from my family's expectations had created space for growth I hadn't anticipated. Without the constant undercurrent of seeking approval, I found myself making decisions based solely on what I wanted and what would benefit my company, rather than what might finally earn my parents' respect. It was during this period of rebuilding that the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. A Chicago number I didn't recognize called one Tuesday afternoon. When I answered, the voice belonged to James, my sister's husband. "I thought you should know," he said without preamble. "Your parents are telling everyone who will listen about their successful son, the tech executive. Your father mentioned your company valuation during his physical therapy appointment yesterday." The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of minimizing my achievements, they were now using my success as social currency, claiming proximity to achievement they had played no role in supporting. The final confirmation that our relationship had been fundamentally transactional rather than unconditionally supportive. "Thanks for letting me know," I replied, surprised by my own lack of emotional response. Where once this information would have triggered anger or hurt, I now felt only a calm certainty that I had made the right decision in creating distance. "They're asking about you constantly," James continued. "Melissa is tired of being the go-between. They want to visit you in Florida." The request hung in the air between us. After weeks of reflection, I was finally ready to decide how much, if any, relationship I wanted to maintain with my parents moving forward. The journey of emotional healing began in earnest once I made the conscious decision to prioritize my well-being over the impossible quest for parental approval. My beach house, initially purchased as a symbol of achievement, transformed into a sanctuary where I could rebuild my sense of self, apart from family expectations. The healing wasn't linear or simple. Some mornings I woke feeling liberated, energized by the freedom to define success on my own terms. Other days, usually around traditional family holidays or milestones, the absence of normal family connections hit harder. During these moments, I reminded myself that distance wasn't the same as animosity. I hadn't cut ties out of vengeance, but out of self-preservation. Central to my healing process was the creation of a chosen family. In Florida, I found connections that were refreshingly straightforward. My neighbors invited me for barbecues without underlying judgments about my career path. Local business owners shared advice and community insights without comparing me to more legitimate professionals. These relationships, based on mutual respect rather than obligation, became the foundation of my new support system. My executive team at Black Box Solutions became another crucial part of this chosen family. During a leadership retreat at my beach house, I shared the full story of my family background, something I had previously kept separate from my professional life. Their understanding and support reinforced what I had begun to learn: that genuine connections come from being authentically yourself, not from trying to fulfill others' expectations. Laura, a woman I met through the local Entrepreneurs Association, became an unexpected source of support. Our relationship developed naturally, without the weight of family history coloring her perception of me. "I like that you built something from nothing," she said during one of our early dates. "That takes courage most people don't have." Her straightforward appreciation for my path, without qualifications or comparisons, was refreshingly validating. 3 months after relocating to Florida, I received another request from my parents to visit. After careful consideration and conversations with both my therapist and Melissa, I agreed to a meeting, but with clear boundaries. We would meet on neutral ground, a restaurant near my beach house, and the visit would be limited to lunch rather than an extended stay. When they arrived, the physical changes in them were striking. My father looked smaller somehow. The bluster that had characterized him throughout my childhood diminished by recent events. My mother seemed anxious, carefully monitoring her words in a way she never had before. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably, and we all felt it. "Your house is beautiful," my mother offered after initial pleasantries. "We drove by yesterday." The fact that they had located and viewed my home without invitation was telling. Boundaries remained a foreign concept to them. "I would have shown it to you if you'd asked," I replied evenly. The conversation remained superficial throughout the meal, touching on neutral topics like the weather in Florida compared to Chicago and Melissa's recent promotion at the medical school. It wasn't until coffee arrived that my father finally addressed the elephant in the room. "We've been thinking about what happened," he began, studying his cup rather than meeting my eyes. "Maybe we were too hard on you growing up. Your business, it's really something." We didn't understand. It wasn't quite an apology, more an acknowledgement that their assessment had been incorrect rather than harmful. Still, it represented more self-reflection than I had previously witnessed from him. "It's not about the business," I responded carefully. "It's about respect. You didn't respect my choices, my path, or ultimately me as an adult capable of making my own decisions. The money just made that disrespect more obvious." My mother reached across the table as if to take my hand, then seemed to think better of it. "We always wanted what was best for you," she said, falling back on the justification parents have used for generations. "You wanted what you thought was best," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." We left the restaurant without any dramatic reconciliation or final rupture. Instead, we reached a kind of tentative truce. I would maintain some contact with them, periodic calls and occasional visits, but with firm boundaries around what I would share and what support I would provide. They seemed to accept these terms, perhaps recognizing it was more connection than they might otherwise have. In the months that followed, I found meaning in extending the lessons from my own experience to help others. I established a scholarship fund for entrepreneurial students who think differently, specifically designed to support those pursuing non-traditional educational paths. The first year, we awarded 10 scholarships to promising young people whose creative approaches might have been overlooked by conventional metrics. This initiative expanded into a formal mentorship program, where I and other successful entrepreneurs who had bypassed traditional routes worked directly with young innovators. Watching these students flourish with the right support, I often thought about how different my early years might have been with similar encouragement. My relationship with my parents settled into a new pattern, not close, but not entirely estranged. I maintained appropriate boundaries while acknowledging the complexity of family bonds. When my mother called asking for financial help with a medical procedure my father needed, I arranged payment directly to the hospital rather than giving them cash that might be diverted to gambling. When they expressed interest in visiting for Christmas, I agreed, but arranged for them to stay at a nearby hotel rather than in my home. These boundaries weren't punitive but protective, creating the conditions under which some form of relationship remained possible. Over time, my father's attempts to leverage my success in social situations decreased, and my mother's comparisons between my path and more traditional ones grew less frequent. Whether from genuine growth or simply pragmatic adaptation to the new reality, they began to interact with me as the adult I was, rather than the child who had disappointed them. The most profound change, however, wasn't in my relationship with my parents, but in my relationship with myself. The validation I had sought externally for so long gradually became internal. I measured success, not by others' recognition, but by the impact of my work, the culture of my company, and the quality of my relationships. Black Box Solutions continued to thrive, opening a Florida office that eventually became our headquarters. The company expanded internationally, with clients across North America and Europe. We launched a foundation focused on technological education for underserved communities, turning financial success into meaningful social impact. Through it all, I carried the lessons learned from those difficult family dynamics. I built a company culture that celebrated diverse thinking styles and multiple paths to excellence. I developed a leadership approach that focused on results rather than credentials. I created space for innovation that might have been stifled in more traditional environments. One evening, nearly a year after that fateful family confrontation, I hosted a dinner party at my beach house for close friends and colleagues. As we gathered on the deck watching the sunset over the Gulf of Mexico, Laura asked what I considered my greatest achievement. The old answer would have focused on the company valuation or client list, external markers of success that might finally prove my worth to those who had doubted me. Instead, I found myself giving a different response. Learning to define success for myself, I said, watching the last sliver of sun disappear below the horizon, and creating space for others to do the same. That night, surrounded by people who valued me for exactly who I was, I recognized the journey had come full circle. From a child desperate for approval to an adult confident in his own path, I had discovered that true success isn't measured by degrees, dollars, or others' validation. It's found in the courage to follow your own instincts, the resilience to weather others' disapproval, and the wisdom to build a life aligned with your authentic self. The $45 million company was never the point. It was simply proof, to myself more than anyone, that different doesn't mean deficient, that conventional wisdom isn't always wise, that the path others expect you to take rarely leads to where you truly belong. Have you ever had to choose between pleasing others and being true to yourself? How did you handle that difficult decision? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more authentic life stories. Remember, the most important approval will always be your own. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to follow your unique path, wherever it may lead.